A couple years ago, a new store called The Haven opened in downtown Ashland, Oregon. It was in one of the biggest retail spaces in this southern Oregon town. The Haven sold crystals, scarves, tea, and glass bottles of gold-flecked liquid labeled living water that cost $111. People in town were puzzled by this, and by the fact that the store wasn't open very often. After a clearance sale, The Haven recently closed for good.
I mean, you cannot go to like a dinner party or a gathering here without it coming up.
Alexis Mixter and her husband moved to Ashland from California about 3 years ago. They now live in nearby Talent. Mixter is still very concerned about the people behind The Haven. The store was owned by a spiritual group called Twin Ray.
They all dress in white and they look like if you were going to make up a fake cult, not to use such a charged word, but I'll use it in this case anyway. If you were going to make it up, that's what they look like.
So who are these people in all white? And what are they doing in Southern Oregon? That's what reporter Leah Satilli wanted to know. Leah has covered all kinds of fringe groups in her career. You might remember the awesome Bundyville podcast she hosted a few years ago, digging into the Bundy family after the 2016 takeover of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge in Oregon's Harney County. She's been working on a book about New Age ideologies. That's how she first became aware of Twin Ray. I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. So, Leah, what exactly is Twin Ray?
So Twin Ray is a group that came across my radar a couple of years ago. It's led by a married couple, a man named Akasha Sananda and a woman named Shekinah Ma. A few months ago, they moved into this gigantic mansion in Ashland, and people started talking about them a lot because of their store, The Haven, and rumors about these retreats that they held at their house. In many ways, Twin Ray is kind of a typical New Age group for right now. They're really into talking about crystals and elevating human consciousness, but they're also predominantly online, offering life coaching sessions and things like that. And they're not related to another group called Twin Flame Universe that was the subject of 2 recent documentary series put out by Amazon and Netflix. There's a lot of clips on YouTube of the Twin Ray leaders talking about their beliefs. They can be really hard to follow. They usually appear sitting side by side, wearing white robes, often in a large room with big crystals and lots of natural light.
What we're here to do is return the Earth to her place, her rightful place in the solar system, and thus the solar system to its rightful place in the cosmos and within the universe. How does one do that? You work within the sentient life of the planet itself. You work within the life force of the planet itself, and you start to break through the patterns of distractions that have held and withheld the great information and thus the great ascension and the rise of a species. We're here to do that.
And what that looks like at a practical level is really teach everyone that's willing and receptive to the message that you are ultimately divine and divinity incarnate, and how to manifest that divinity in, because it's not just a realization, it's not just a mental perception, it's about embodying it and manifesting it to the highest potential.
Wow, okay. So Alexis Mixter, the Ashland resident we heard from a minute ago, called them a cult. Do you think that's accurate?
Over the years, as I've been reporting on religions in the Western United States, I've found that the word cult is a pretty charged term. Religious scholars tend to prefer new religious movement. During my reporting, I spoke to Marian Goldman, a University of Oregon professor emerita in sociology and religious studies.
Cult is such a loaded word. Everybody uses it. You know what it means. I'm more comfortable saying alternative religion. All religions start as alternative religions.
Alternative religion. Okay, got it. And you were also able to connect with someone who was part of this group for years, right?
Yeah, she asked that I not use her real name, so I'll call her Sarai.
Okay, got it.
Sarai first heard Akasha Sananda on a radio show and podcast called Straight Talk for the Soul in 2017. The host, Carrie Murphy, is very friendly toward alternative religions.
It is commanded by the divine presence and the universal harmonic law of divine love that a field of harmonic divine love be set up for the purposes of facilitating transformation.
And at this time, did you get a sense for what was going on in Sarai's life at the time she heard this podcast?
Yes, she told me she was recently divorced and she was kind of at a crossroads in her life. Sarai also asked us to disguise her voice for this podcast. She said she's afraid of retaliation from the Twin Ray leaders, and she wants to protect herself as well as her friends and family.
I was at that place in my life where I'm just like, okay, what do I do next? Like, I left my job with the federal government that I was in for almost 12 years. I left my husband, I left my job, and I'm completely basically reinventing my life. So I'm like kind of dabbling in all these different things. You know, that's when I learned the energy healing modalities and started to look into coaching and healing.
And what does she mean by energy healing modalities?
Sarai had been learning all about these different pseudo-scientific energy healing techniques like Reiki, a Japanese practice that is supposed to reduce stress through gentle touch. And there was another one called Theta Healing, which is a trademarked meditation technique that claims to promote emotional healing by changing people's brainwaves. She'd been listening to different sources calling themselves teachers, coaches, and healers.
Okay, and with all of these different voices that she was listening to, where does Akasha Sananda from Twin Ray fit into all of that?
Sarai said that when she heard Akasha Sananda on that podcast, he stood out in a really specific way.
Like at that point, I had listened to quite a few different like teachers, healers, coaches, so that whole space. And he comes on and it was like everything I had learned at that point, because that's what he does. You know, he draws, he synthesizes all these different teachings and he pulls them all together. And it was like, oh my gosh, like it all kind of clicked. It all kind of made sense.
And even though Sananda was younger than Sarai, he wasn't even 30 at that time, she felt like he was someone she could learn a lot from. And this was also before he started appearing publicly with the woman known as Shekinah Ma.
Okay, so I do want to come back to Sarai and her experience with Twin Ray, but I am really curious about the two leaders. First of all, those are not their real names, right?
No. He changed his name from Harley Forster to Akasha Sananda and sometimes goes by the name Sanandaji. She changed her name from Mia Therese Deutschel, and she's gone by a few different names, including Miananda, the Cosmic Priestess, and Lady Nanda. Right now, she seems to be consistently going by Shekinah Ma. She's about 13 years older than he is, and she had a brief acting career under her original name. She played the role of Party Girl in a 2009 episode of the spy series Burn Notice.
Okay, good to know. And it's also not extremely surprising to me that she had a prior acting career. So Sananda is from Adelaide, Australia, but I think Shekinah Ma is American, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why does she speak in a vaguely British accent?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So she was born in Ohio, but her accent has kind of developed over time. B. Schofield at Guru Magazine put together a series of clips on YouTube that shows that evolution.
Hello, my loves. Miananda, the Cosmic Priestess here. Today, I want to talk to you about what it means to be naked. Welcome. I am Miananda, the Divine Mother, and I am here with you now. Today, we're going to talk about something that is generally not spoken of or readily understood. And it is the integration of the high self.
When you look at the word cosmos, you can see it's close to chaos. And yet, all energy seeks to do is complete itself. And that's exactly what's happening right now. This is the completion of a 25,600-year cycle. And it is unprecedented. Nobody has experienced anything like this since written and recorded history, and well before that.
Okay, super interesting to hear how that's changed over time. Let's get back to Sarai and her story. You mentioned a minute ago that we disguised her voice, which makes me ask myself, why do you think she's so afraid of the leaders of Twin Ray?
I think it's because of what recently happened with a woman from Oregon who posted a series of TikTok videos about the group. She sent me the cease and desist order that she was served from a New York law firm that's representing Twin Ray, demanding she take down her content. It said, "Please be advised that we have been investigating you and your family in the last year. We will continue to investigate you and your family and take any legal action necessary to protect our client." I think that really spooked a lot of people who've spoken out publicly about Twin Ray.
Sarai first heard Akasha Sananda on that podcast back in 2017. Later that year, she signed up for a course he was offering, and she told Leah she started to believe he was the second coming of Jesus. She says Sananda never actually directly claimed that, but hinted at it. In 2018, Sananda started appearing with the woman who now calls herself Shekinah Ma. At first, Sarai wasn't sure about her, but as a loyal follower of Sananda, she set aside her personal biases and accepted his partner as what she referred to as a being of pure love. She paid thousands of dollars for an online coaching course Twin Ray offers called an Ascendantship. Sarai described it as a mentorship program where she met with the two leaders over Zoom. As part of this program, they instructed her to eat only fruit and charcoal pudding.
Like, you need to wake up at 6 in the morning and take a cold shower, and you need to, eat this charcoal pudding, and you're only allowed to have, fruit, the same fruit every day. I literally, for 6 months, I ate nothing but grapes and watermelon and charcoal pudding.
When she complained about feeling hungry, she said Sananda reluctantly said she could also eat pasta. One of the most intense experiences that Sarai described in her time with Twin Ray was what the group refers to as an elixir ceremony. So, Leah, what exactly were these elixir ceremonies all about?
Sarai says they started in 2019. They would have these retreats. The first one Sarai went to was at their home in Encinitas, which they called the Miracle Temple. This was before they moved to Ashland. They bring people to these retreats, and they give them a mysterious substance which contains some kind of psychedelic.
They never say what is in it. It's just this sacred elixir. That's how it's described. A sacred sacrament, sacred elixir.
Whoa. And you weren't able to find out what was in it?
No, it could be ayahuasca or DMT or presumably some other unknown psychedelic substance. Sarai described her first experience with it as traumatic. She said this was when she started to realize that she might be a part of a cult. She actually said that right before she drank this mysterious elixir, she wondered if it would kill her.
It's an intense, very, 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 very intense process. A lot of people had really, really tough experiences with their first elixirs in January. There's a lot of, I guess one person just kept screaming the whole night. And whoa.
Yeah, whoa. And she obviously survived, but she didn't leave Twin Ray at that point, even though she'd just basically been traumatized.
Yeah, she said it took her a couple of days to recover from that experience.
So after that, I felt really light, and it did feel really good. Oh wow, that was really purifying.
Okay, so I guess that's what kept her coming back.
Yeah, and I think that because she'd been raised Christian, this idea of Akasha as the second coming of Jesus was very appealing to her. Marion Goldman, the academic expert I spoke to, said that this is pretty common.
It's called cultural continuity. And it's the idea that you connect with a religious tradition that people have been raised in, aka Christianity. And that's one reason why people often say they've had contact with, maybe even are in an incarnation of Jesus, because that helps people blend into American life.
That's so interesting, and something I thought about when I was noticing, these kind of references to Christianity in your reporting. So if Akasha Sananda is Jesus, theoretically, who is Shekinah Ma?
I get the sense that they don't directly claim this, but they lead their followers to believe they are the incarnations of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Sananda claims that he was trained by Jesus or ascended from Jesus, things like that.
They say that they're liberated beings. They refer to immortality. They allude to the fact that they're Jesus and Mary Magdalene, divine mother and father.
Okay. And so Sarai went to a few other elixir ceremonies after that first one, right?
Yeah, she went to a retreat and an elixir ceremony in Sedona and another one in Hawaii. She said that the same 8 or 9 people were showing up to all those retreats, and they started to feel like a kind of family. And the Twin Ray leaders were referring to themselves as mother and father. That struck me as odd because she's actually a lot older than both of them. But she described it like being under a kind of spell.
It's crazy now when I look back at how much power I had given them. I had given them a tremendous amount of power. I was so subservient to them.
Coming up after a break, we'll hear how the spell was finally broken for Sarai. Okay, so Sarai did have that terrifying moment at her first elixir ceremony where she thought she might die. But she had also literally bought into Twin Ray, so she continued to set aside her concerns. Leah, how much did Sarai spend on their classes?
In 2018, Sarai paid $17,000 in tuition for year-long classes. They were called Golden Age Mystery School and Golden Path Ascendantship classes. And the way she paid them was definitely odd. She said the leaders told her she needed to pay in euros, which meant she was spending more than she originally agreed to. And she had to deposit the funds into an Estonian bank account.
Whoa.
Sarai estimates she spent at least $80,000 on Twin Ray classes, retreats, jewelry, and other products during her 4 years with the group.
Wow, $80,000 in euros into an Estonian bank account. Okay. I mean, that's a ton of money to ask people to pay. So are only rich people involved in this group or what?
Well, the leaders are certainly putting off an expensive vibe. And I should say Sarai was actually pretty embarrassed to admit that's how much she spent on Twin Ray. She told me that paying money wasn't the only way to be a part of the group. For people who can't afford the retreats, the leaders also have team members who, until recently, worked at their store, The Haven, and work for them at their home. I wasn't able to verify if those people are paid. Sarai told me, I paid with my money, but others are paying with their lives. Since leaving, Sarai has come to believe that Twin Ray is a cult.
Okay, so what did lead her to the point that she was able to leave?
Well, she said one of the first things that really struck her as inconsistent with the messaging she'd heard from the leaders up to that point came in 2020. That's when the pandemic lockdown forced them to cancel some upcoming retreats.
About a week before, they canceled the retreats because of COVID. And this really threw me off, by the way. I thought they could see everything and they knew everything. That's what they said. but you're invincible. Like, what do you mean? Like, they're miraculous. They're miracle healers. Why are they limited by this? Like, I was so confused.
They did reschedule a retreat for July in Shasta, California. A few months after that, Sarai said she watched a documentary series called Scientology and the Aftermath. It's an investigative series, and it includes interviews with the actress Leah Remini and other former Scientologists.
Honestly, I feel like that got me out of there. I didn't leave right away, but man, when I was watching that, it was creepy. Yeah. Parallels.
It seems like things kind of came to a head just before she went to her last retreat with Twin Ray in the fall of 2021, after they moved to Oregon. She said that she went into a deep meditation that lasted for about 2 days.
And all of a sudden, I come out, like I emerge from it, right? And there was one thought. It was a question. And it was like, do they have egos?
Do the leaders have egos? That's the question. Sarai said she went into the retreat at their mansion in Ashland with that question in her mind, and she had a really different experience. She said that a big part of these retreats was something called a sharing circle.
Sharing circles would take all day. It was basically the only acceptable sharing was telling them how wonderful they are and how amazing they were. That was the only acceptable sharing. That took all day.
And she noticed that the leaders seemed to be feeding off of this praise. So obviously, they have pretty big egos.
All of a sudden, it was like, the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Toto pulls back the curtain. Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, they're literally like kids playing house, trying to create their kingdom and their empire, and we're believing them. And we're believing they're the king and queen. And they got us to believe it because they believe it, and so we believe it. It's just like this big charade just like fell apart. Here I thought they were above us, when in fact they're using us to have power, to have any power at all.
Leah, what happened when she decided to disconnect from Twin Ray?
She said at that point, she didn't exactly think of Twin Ray as a cult. It just seemed like she'd been wasting her time and money on something that wasn't really worth it. But then she told them she was leaving, and she said the way they reacted was pretty over the top.
All I wanted to do was say, I'm grateful for this experience, and I just feel like it's time for me to move on. And they're like, well, what's your problem? You've been with us for 4 years. Like, what is your problem? Like, if you start yelling at me, this guy is acting like he's Mr. Jesus and Mr. Wonderful, love and liberation. We're only love. We only teach love. It's like yelling at me. And I'm like, dude, whatever you're trying to do here, I wish you well, but this feels way too binding.
Oh my God, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, Sarai told me that this call with them lasted about 45 minutes, and it was really intense the entire time. And after that, she also sent messages to around 30 people who were still involved with Twin Ray, just letting them know that she was leaving, and she never heard back from any of them.
It was like 4 years of my life gone over. I mean, the true healing work began when I left the community.
I am glad that she has started that healing work. Why do you think Sarai chose to share her story, especially considering that she didn't want her name to be used and asked us to disguise her voice as well?
Yeah, I get the sense from her and others that I spoke to that they just really want people to know that Twin Ray isn't the project of love and light that they make it out to be. And I think they really want the leaders to be honest about who they really are. They claim this mantle that they are somehow more enlightened or elevated than other people, but at the end of the day, they're just people. And I got this sense from people who'd gone through the elixir ceremonies that they were afraid someone could get really hurt by the group.
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable to me. So what does her experience tell you about this group and what they're doing in Ashland?
Well, it definitely gives a lot of credibility to the fears that I heard from Ashland residents like Alexis Mixter.
It's basically just red flag after red flag after red flag.
She's the one who moved up from California, and she says there are a lot of transplants just like her in Ashland. And it's the kind of place where a shop like The Haven, which was run by Twin Ray, didn't necessarily seem that weird if you're just walking by.
I mean, it's a little hippie. It's a little like left of center anyway. Everyone does yoga. Everyone has crystals. It's a little strange. And I think that's very interesting that they managed to come into a town who, if they think they knew more about it, might have a problem with it. But instead, they just sort of walk past and are like, oh, well, they sell crystals and do, I guess, breath work.
Since I spoke with Alexis a few months ago, the store has closed, as we talked about earlier. And it's actually unclear if the Twin Ray leaders are still living in the mansion in Ashland. County records show that they gave the house back to the previous owners in lieu of foreclosure. The couple does still own some undeveloped land just north of the estate. They haven't been responding to my request for comment, and so it's really unclear if they're going to stay in Ashland. They also haven't been posting to their social media accounts since April. So with the closure of their store, the future of this group is really unclear.
So, I mean, regardless of what happens with Twin Ray, like you say, it's very unclear right now. It sounds like Ashland is the kind of place where a potential cult could fly under the radar.
This is a place that is really no stranger to alternative religions. The largest hotels in town are actually owned by Scientologists. University of Oregon professor emerita Marian Goldman told me that Ashland was a desirable place for these kinds of groups because of the relatively cheap land and its proximity to California. That has become less important with so many groups recruiting online, but clearly there is still some kind of draw.
Now, I love Ashland personally because there's so many groups. I can't even count them. I guess the important thing with that is it's acceptable, that it's never been so marginalized.
This is really fascinating. How does Twin Ray fit in with other New Age religions that you've been researching?
Well, I actually have a whole book about the history of New Age ideologies in America coming out next year and how popular groups like this can be with women and other people who've been historically shut out of many organized religions. And I think Twin Ray is a part of a long lineage of groups who purport themselves to be enlightened beings, when in reality, they seem to be grifting money from vulnerable people who are looking for spiritual answers.
Okay, well, we are very much looking forward to reading your forthcoming book. And before we wrap up, while you're here with us in the studio, I just want to ask you to tell us a bit about the new podcast you're working on for OPB. So it's called Hush, right?
Right. And as the name implies, it's an investigative podcast that looks into stories that have been hidden in some way from the public. For the first season, we're reporting on Jesse Johnson, a man who was locked up for about 25 years in Oregon and lived on death row. Johnson has always insisted he was innocent, and we uncover some startling details that bring into question why the state of Oregon tried for so long to execute him.
And Evergreen listeners are going to get a very special sneak preview of the first episode before the release of the new podcast. We'll have the first episode of Hush on August 12th, so stay tuned. And Leah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Leah Satilli is a journalist and writer based in Portland, Oregon. You can read her story about Twin Ray on opb.org. And check out her book, When the Moon Turns to Blood. It's a fascinating story about religious extremism. Thank you so much for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Join us next week as we celebrate pride and queer communities in our region with 2 intergenerational conversations about the importance of queer history and combating queer erasure with resilience and friendship. Yeah, we know June is technically Pride Month, but celebrations spill over into July, and we want to keep this celebration going too. If you're here listening right now, you are part of our brand new podcast family. You can help us grow by leaving a review on your favorite podcast app, including YouTube. Follow us there, and hey, tell your friends. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nolene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wing. Leah Satilli did the interviews you heard. Our theme music comes from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, please reach out. Email theevergreen@opb.org. And while you're at it, start thinking about what questions you have for our next At Work With interview. This month, we'll be talking to a private investigator. What is that like? Send us your burning questions for them by email or on our website, opb.org/theevergreen. Or leave us a voicemail at 503-977-7768. That number one more time, 503-977-7768. We always love to hear our listeners' voices. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.